And we've been tracking the developments that are happening halfway across the world, but indeed are going to be fascinating. And there's a global perspective to all of this because it does matter what America decides, what sort of policy framework, what sort of tone and tenor it sets, because let's not underestimate the American influence on global affairs. It is large and it remains. So what is fundamentally different between the two candidates, and what will fundamentally change come a result in a couple of days from now and a presidential transfer of power in 3 months? Let's have that conversation. J.K. Tripathi, former Indian diplomat, joining us on the broadcast. Ksenia Kondratyeва, she's a journalist joining us from Moscow. Alexei Goncharenko, he's a Ukrainian MP, joining us on the broadcast as well. And Maura Moynihan, she's joining us. She's a journalist and her father was the late US Senator Daniel Patrick. Welcome back to the telecast to all of you. And let me start with, if I can, with Alexei. Alexei, is there a lot at stake, personally, fundamentally, that has an impact on how you perceive the future of the troubles that are going on in your country?
Oh, definitely. These elections in the United States will have a big impact on what's going on in Ukraine and in this Russian brutal war of aggression against my country. But I don't think that there are scenarios catastrophic where one or other candidate can stop any support of Ukraine, because it's in the best interest of the United States of America to stop autocratic Russia, allied to China, to Iran and other forces of chaos on the planet. So I am not afraid of the results, but definitely there will be changes. And if President Trump or if President Harris they will have their own attitude, and the policy can change. So we are looking for who will be elected. But the most important for us is that the United States should elect new president in a peaceful way, that the transition of power should happen smoothly without any conflicts. In other case, that will be a huge problem for the whole world. So that's the most important for me.
Alexei, so what do you make of the fact when a Donald Trump comes and says that if I had been president, A, the war would never have happened, and B, it should end quickly?
The first thing, I don't know, maybe if Trump would be president, maybe it would not happen. I don't know. It's impossible to answer. And secondly, when he is saying that he will end the war quickly, I also want to end the war as quick as possible. The question is, how does he see it? And we don't have an answer on this question. I think it should be based on the international law. And the international law is very clear here. Ukrainian territory should be fully liberated and Ukrainian territorial integrity should be restored. But I don't know what President Trump means, and I'm not sure that he knows himself. I don't think that he thinks a lot about Ukraine for the moment. He thinks about his own re-election. And if he will be re-elected, in this case, he will deal with the problem.
But do you think that the war in Ukraine has been an issue, or is simply about inflation and domestic politics? Because a lot of conversation has certainly happened. Do you think it's an issue for Americans as they're going to cast their votes in the next 24 hours?
You know, I'm a politician myself. Always people in the country are more interested in what's going on with them. Inflation, prices, security inside their own country.
Fair enough.
But I think that in international relationships, there are two hot topics. One is Russian war against Ukraine, and the second is Middle East. So these are two hot topics which are also important in this agenda, but definitely they are not so important like internal American things. It's normal.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Fair enough, because the Americans are interested about what's happening in America, and foreign policy and what's happening in the world does matter in terms of policy issues and conversations. But is it going to be front and center when somebody's casting their votes in the next 24 hours? We don't know. But it does matter. America still has a global influence. And let's not underestimate that at all. I can argue both in my neighborhood, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, that there is an American hand, which way you can argue both sides. So let's get a perspective from Moscow. Ms. Kondratyeва, how are you observing what is taking place in America right now, where an election has become too close to call. It's neck and neck. It has been last time around. It was the time before that. Nobody seems to be able to predict. So something is happening that is making this a very contentious election.
Right. Thanks for having me, Rishabh. See, I would say that the kind of attention paid to US election here in Moscow is probably less than expected. Because at this moment, the relationship between the two countries is destroyed to such a level that Moscow doesn't really. I'm here I cite the way experts and some of the officials see that it doesn't matter who is basically at the top, because if you take Harris, it's more or less clear that it's continuation of Joe Biden's policies, but there is nothing clear much on Donald Trump, because he was quite evasive when answering questions in Russia or Ukraine war, for that matter. And we can, of course, discuss his plans, mysterious plans to end the conflict, but we haven't seen the plan, and whether it will be acceptable to Moscow, whether it will be acceptable to Kiev, we don't have anything on the paper. Same goes with basically Middle East issue. Now, there have been a lot of talks in the recent days about his statements on Russia and China being close, and him trying to basically break up that union. But that's practically, I don't know how it's possible, because for that he has to, cancel those tens of thousands of sanctions that Russia is under. And to remind you, despite all the narrative existing mainly in the international and the US media of Trump being friend of Russia, that's quite absurd, because the deterioration in relationship, the sanctions, arming of Ukraine has been happening under his presidency. So I don't think there is any clarity or any understanding what happens with the relationship once he becomes the president. So it's equally bad.
Okay, but is there something at stake? Is there a global interest in how America votes, therefore decides on policy? Is there an expectation that it does make a difference, whether there's a Republican in the like and form of a Donald Trump, or there's a Democrat in the different form of a Kamala Harris, a Joe Biden having a different background? Does it matter in terms of policy?
We are not sure. With Kamala Harris, of course, we are sure about the policies, its continuation, but we cannot be sure about policies when Trump comes, if Trump wins, because whatever unrealistic promises he makes, and he has made some promises even before. So I don't think. I think we have to see how it goes. But again, it's equally bad. The relationship between the two countries at such a low, that it doesn't matter at the moment. And
okay.
I don't think there will be a change in policy, at least as far as Ukraine conflict is concerned.
Okay,
I don't see a breakthrough there. Breakthrough will
there
happen.
Has to be something different, right? Somebody's got to try something different. Otherwise, we are repeating the same experiment and expecting different results. Let me get Maura Moynihan back into this conversation. Ms. Moynihan, in terms of international policy, because from the stock markets to the recently concluded elections in Japan, to what we've seen happen in our neighborhood in Bangladesh, there's been a coup. What happens in China? What happens in Ukraine? What happens in Gaza and Lebanon and in Iran, where B-52 bombers are being deployed? Does this make a difference? Does the policy of an administration change after an election?
Well, of course it does. The foreign policy is largely directed by the president. The president has more power over foreign policy than he does over domestic policy, where the power really does reside in the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I was impressed with Donald Trump's foreign policy because I was living in India, Thailand, and Nepal the first 3 years of his presidency. And when he walked over the DMZ and shook Kim Jong-un's hand, I was in Bangkok, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief all over Asia. That had never happened before. And I recall the lady who spoke before me from Russia, from Moscow, that 5 hours after Trump was declared president-elect in November of 2016, Vladimir Putin made a press conference from the Kremlin where he said, "We want peace. The Cold War's over. Russia is not a communist state anymore. Let's move forward together." And it was incredibly impressive. I've always been impressed with President Putin's. He's obviously an extremely intelligent man. His interview with Tucker Carlson was watched by millions of Americans. I like the way he spoke about how communism almost destroyed Russian civilization. The real elephant in the room that I'm glad you mentioned, Rishabh, is communist China. Now, communist China has its hooks into Biden-Harris. And to Tim Walz in particular, the vice presidential nominee, which is so shocking to people like myself who have been a Tibet expert for 5 decades. This man, Tim Walz, made 35 trips to Communist China, sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. He promoted the Little Red Book. A big story blew up last week all over the place about how he had an affair with the daughter of a senior CCP official. And he has not ever said, "Oh, well, that was just for fun." No, he's a communist. And Joe Biden's nickname for many years in the Senate and as vice president was Beijing Biden. When he was vice president, he went to Beijing with his son Hunter, who came back with a $1.5 billion check from a Chinese Communist Party company. It was on the front page of the Washington Post and New York Times, because the media in this country has totally normalized communist China while they demonize democratic India.
Okay, but many people, Maura, will argue that yes, the Joe Biden administration has stood firmly with Israel. It has stood firmly with Ukraine. And Ukrainians will say they need the support right now. They don't want a walkover and sort of a compromise solution settled in Washington where their interests will not be taken into account.
He has not stood with Israel. He removed the sanctions President Trump put on Iran, which made them incredibly rich, and shortly thereafter, October 7th happened. And it was Vladimir Putin who said very clearly in the Tucker Carlson interview that it was Boris Johnson and Joe Biden who wanted the war in Ukraine. How many lives have been lost? How much suffering has occurred? And I'm telling you, most Americans that I talk to, they don't want to go to war with Russia. They don't want war in the Middle East. They want peace. But this country is at war because of the open border. There are armed criminal gangs that are roaming freely through our streets, protected by sanctuary city policies.
Okay.
President Trump is quite correct when he says in his rallies, we are under invasion. We are an occupied country.
Okay, hang on. Let me get Ambassador Tripathi into this. Scott
China.
Faulkner joining us on the broadcast as well.
Point?
I'll come to you, ma'am, in just a second. Let me get Ambassador Tripathi. Ambassador Tripathi, is there a fundamental policy issue at play here? Is the American voter really going out there worrying about what's happening on the global front? Are they fearful of China? Are they worried about the war in Ukraine? Are they worried about what's happening in Syria and Lebanon and in Gaza? Or is it simply about the American voter worrying about what's happening in their supermarkets?
Well, certainly, Rishabh, with apologies from Mrs. Moynihan, I would like to say that American voters, generally American voters, are least interested in American foreign policy. What they are, they don't care whether what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Israel, what is happening in Gaza or Lebanon. What they care basically is that American Marines should not come back to USA in body bags. That when it comes to foreign policy, that's the bottom line that the normal American voter cares about. Otherwise, main reasons are inflation, joblessness, recession and what you call trade trade
Okay,
deficit.
but Ambassador
trade
Tripathi,
problem.
then does it matter? Does it matter in Moscow? Does it matter in Kiev? Does it matter in Tokyo? Does it matter in London? Does it matter in New Delhi? Who takes over 3 months from
Well,
now?
it matters because if the American first policy propagated by Trump, which means that you won't allow you will reduce immigration, you will reduce trade, you won't you will protect trade. So if the trade protection is there, then certainly it matters for Japan, it matters for India, it also matters for China. Though you see the bilateral trade between US and China has been growing steadily despite all those sanctions, so-called sanctions, etc. Russia, I don't think it matters much because America
No, but
has
Ambassador
tried
Tripathi,
so
can
many
can the
sanctions
United States, is it being able to, has it been able to in the past 10, 15, 20 years through sanctions, through trade controls? Because if you're cracking down on import tariffs on China, well, they are just exporting their cars in from Mexico. Okay, so the loopholes in the world are too many, and people who are in business can find them. So is it a policy issue that really changes the world?
Well, I don't think that it is a policy issue. I feel that policy, by and large, American foreign policy has been same. The variation is in small degrees between the two major parties. But what is there is the fundamental mistake in the foreign policy, in the trade policy, when trade policy or business policy is not aligned with your foreign policy, then you suffer like you are doing now. So
Okay,
that
well,
is my take.
you have a very rich trillionaire telling you that Trump is the man, and he's campaigning for him as we speak, and Trump is returning the favor with a lot of compliments and rallies holding in Wisconsin right now. Let me get Scott Faulkner into this conversation. Scott Faulkner, we are 24 hours away from the other half of the American voters, because 80 million have already cast their votes through the postal ballots. How is it still so close? We have seen an election campaign in 2016 that was too close to call. In 2020 that was too close to call. Once again, it's too close to call. What's Kamala Harris done right that she's made it so close?
Well, first of all, I think you need to look at the pollsters themselves. Trump is always undercounted. Their pollsters supposedly have adjusted with algorithms. Well, algorithms can be anybody's guess. But the key is that Trump outperformed the polls in 2016 and won. He outperformed the polls in 2020 and also and lost. So, I don't answer any polls. I probably have had 24 calls or texts and one focus group offer, and I haven't returned any calls or been part of that focus group. Mm-hmm. A lot of Trump supporters do not trust the polls and do not participate in them. So there's an undercount. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch tomorrow night is, does Trump overperform against the polls that are all over the map? So,
but then do we give Kamala Harris credit that she's got 3 months to sort it out, and she's put herself out there? She seems to have a policy roadmap. She's hit the campaign trail. She's raised a lot of funds.
No, she doesn't. No, there have been surveys and university studies done the last 18 months that show 94% of the American media is left-wing, pro-Biden, pro-Harris, anti-Trump. The tracking of news articles, even on our major networks, 90 to 95% are anti-Trump and are 90 to 95% pro-Harris. So when you have that propaganda wall, that propaganda reality, of course, a person who has no experience, who changes her stances every day. In fact, even one station called her out yesterday. She was running an ad pro-Israel in one part of the state, and in the same state she was running an ad pro-Palestinian.
Okay, but why do we? Okay, so let me pick your mind on that.
Away with amazing things.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interject. Let me pick your mind on that, because forget the media, and here's Wikipedia, where, like it or not, a lot of young people get their information from, and this is what it says on Donald Trump. Okay, I'm reading this out. The Trump campaign has been noted for making many false and misleading statements, engaging in anti-immigrant fear-mongering and promoting conspiracy theories. Trump has continued to repeat his false claims that the 2020 election was stolen from him, which prompted the January 6th Capitol attack. Trump's embrace of far-right extremism, as well as increasingly violent, dehumanizing and authoritarian rhetoric against his political opponents, has been described by historians and scholars as populist, authoritarian and fascist. Now, this is Wikipedia, which Wikipedia editors put together. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's not a compliment.
Wikipedia is left-wing, academia is left-wing, the media is left-wing. I mean, the issue is that everyone tries to demonize Trump. Now, Trump, I mean, I came up through the Reagan ranks. Trump is no Reagan. He is not he's not the same kind of inspirational figure and heroic figure that Reagan was. And so that's part of the problem, is that he does, his rhetoric sometimes is unfocused, he exaggerates. I don't think he out and out lies, because that's what Harris and Waltz do. They out and out lie every day about everything, including their own existence. And so and of course the media only fact checks Trump. They do not do a single thing to fact check Waltz and Harris or Biden. And so that's the other part to this. That's why this election is close, is because the reality and the rhetoric are so polarized. You have the world, according to the left-wing Democrats, many of them are actually communists and want communism in this country. They want a unitary dictatorship in this country. They want to abolish, basically, for all intents and purposes, abolish the judiciary and get rid of the Supreme Court, or pack it in such a way where it no longer becomes an independent entity.
Okay.
They'd like to get rid of the filibuster, which would basically turn the Senate into another rubber stamp. I mean, these are the anti-democratic forces. These are the fascist forces. These are the totalitarian forces. Is on the left, not on the right.
Okay, so let me flip this around. All right. So first, Mr. Faulkner, how is a Kamala Harris in a better position to defeat a Donald Trump where a Hillary Clinton was unable to do so? And you'd think Hillary Clinton was a well-established politician, from the Clinton administration, lived in the White House for 8 years. She was as entrenched into the system as could possibly get. Why is Kamala Harris potentially a better bet?
Several reasons. One, the demographics. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who still look at a person's color and face and sex as opposed to their character. And so they're saying, oh, we'll have a black woman in the White House. Well, number one, she's an Asian woman. She's not a black woman. She's a Jamaican Asian. But that's a whole nother discussion of how she fakes her entire demographics. The other thing is that unlike 2016, where the media was still about 80% left-wing, now the media is 94% left-wing. And so and also Hillary was a miserable, horrible person. Most people, even those that worked in the State Department with her, thought she was one of the most miserable people they'd ever met in her life. So she was being propped up, and I think her miserable personality and horrible campaign style, plus also you have to remember, in the final month of the campaign, Hillary was believing her surveys and did not go to some of the key swing states. So she did not go to Wisconsin, Michigan, or Minnesota, or Illinois, and so she lost in all these states because she didn't campaign. Now, Harris is campaigning in these states, so.
Yeah, but she's had far less time. I mean, Joe Biden did hang around till July, which was, many people would say hung around for too late. But okay, so the people did get a chance to see Donald Trump for 4 years, and then they changed their mind. Joe Biden won the election. I mean, it's an odd situation that we are seeing Donald Trump come back after 4 years to fight another election. So what did they not like? What changed a few percentage of the votes?
Well, first of all, in 2020. The issue is that they hid the Biden laptop. And up to 30% of Americans said that if they had known about Biden's Chinese ties and his son's corruption, they may have voted differently. 30%. Now, that was an election that was basically decided by less than 1 or 2%. So the election, you can say it was not stolen in the sense of people stuffing the ballot box, but it was stolen in this way of that they shaped a reality and faked a reality to get Biden across the finish line. Plus, also they they created a much larger pandemic issue than really existed, and forced a lot of people to go into drop boxes and vote by mail, which again favored the Democrats back then. So they changed a lot of reality, just like this time around. They're changing a lot of reality to.
Well, we could be seeing upwards of 45% of the vote still be absentee ballots. It's a large number. It's already around 33-34%. 80 million votes cast.
Well, that's not absentee ballots. So that's early voting, and where people. I mean, I early voted last week myself.
Yes.
So you have and major states. I mean, the key one, which everyone's going to be looking at, is Pennsylvania. They started voting actually in mid-September. They actually had the longest early voting opportunity of any state in the country.
Yes.
And that's also becoming the pivotal state.
Yes. So for people watching the broadcast, that's why 80 million votes have been cast without election day actually starting. Every state has their own rules, and one in 3 votes will probably be ballots that are mailed in. So let me get Alexei back into this conversation. Alexei, let me change the flavor of what we've been discussing and get back to where I began with you. Regardless of who wins, regardless of how this turns out in 2 or 3 days' time, what are your priorities? What would you want for the American administration to continue doing or do differently?
Yeah, very important is that American administration should help to restore international order and international law. That's the main thing, because what we see today is complete destruction of world security system. And one of the reasons is the policy of American administration. We're very thankful to President Biden for supporting Ukraine in the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion, for rallying and uniting our allies around the support to Ukraine. But at the same time, we can't continue this policy, because this policy is enough to help Ukraine to survive, but not enough to win this war. And without victory in this war, we will not restore international order, and we will not restore international law, which is so important not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world, for India, for any other country, because that is the guarantee that there will be no massacre in the world like it could happen. So I hope that whoever will be elected, they will make a decisive steps in order to stop Russia as aggressor, and in order to stop this axis of chaos, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China standing behind them before they started something even more awful than this war of aggression against
Alexei, do you
country.
think that the sanctions against Russia are working, that they're actually pressuring the Russian economy?
Definitely. They're definitely working, but they can work more. But they're definitely working. Believe me, in 10 years, we will see a huge effect of the sanctions on Russia. But the problem is that 10 years is too very long period. That's the problem. But definitely they work. Oh, just for example, to show you how weak Russia in reality is. If Russia would be strong, why they would call North Korean soldiers to Russia? So they even don't have people with whom to fight. They're very weak country which pretends to be empire, but they're not anymore. So the sanctions work, and all what was done, it works. But the problem is that it needs time. And for Ukraine, this time is very precious, because every day we're losing our best people. So
Alexei, isn't that the issue? That the issue is, in the end, Ukrainians are dying and Russians are dying, and everybody else is just sending you weapons and doesn't seem to have a solution.
But I'm sorry, who started this? Ukraine never attacked Russia, and never wanted to, and never was supposed. We don't want any inch of Russian territory. And if Ukraine will not receive any more weapons and support, then Russia will finish Ukraine. And with these people, they will attack next countries. That's all. So that's the story. These weapon is essential because it's giving us possibility to survive.
Are you still hopeful that once the elections are done and dusted, that a future administration may be proactive, that it might not be sanctions and weapon supplies, but actual action might be taken against Russia?
I hope, and next administration should really end this war with a positive result. This can't be never-ending war, and it can't be a defeat for the United States, like Afghanistan was when they left, and that was a catastrophe for President Biden and his administration. So there should be a positive result and positive end, and it's absolutely possible because Russia is a big bloc. That's all.
Okay, so let me get Senior back into this. Senior, let me ask you the question: are the sanctions actually hurting? Is it making a difference where you're staying?
Right. It will be not correct to say they are not working, but I'd like to put it in a different perspective. Firstly, last week or two weeks back, right, we had a gathering of more than 30 leaders of different countries in Kazan, and we were covering that summit as a sign that the sanctions or the narrative against Russia doesn't work the way the West and the US-led West, let me put it that way, wanted. Secondly, if you look at economics, yes, sanctions have complicated trade, the supply chains, whatever is possible, but they complicated it not just for Russia. They complicated it for the entire global South, including India, including some of the poorest countries that have faced issues because of those sanctions. Now, you see trade between, for example, Russia and China or Russia and India growing, right? And that's because those countries pursue their own interests, pursue their own foreign policy, correct? So the sanctions worked in such a way that Russia had to redefine its priorities. It had to create ways which it should have created long back without relying on the West, which it trusted for some time. It relied on the West for some time till the red lines were closed. I'm not sure what those red lines are. A lot of people still are not sure what the actual red lines are. But the entire conflict that we see, this is not just Russia war.
Okay, but let me give you a perspective, because it's an opinion. I understand it, but as we see it over here, the Americans send the weaponry, or the weaponry comes from elsewhere. Ukrainians die, Russians die. Your arms and ammunition gets expended, and somebody pays the bill to the American military complex. It seems America's got nothing to lose here. Why would they want you to stop?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. The war is very good and profitable for the U.S. and it doesn't lose its own people. That's why, whatever you asked me that question before, what will change if if Trump becomes president? That's what we don't know, because for America, which has Russia and China as the main targets of its foreign policy, it wants to contain both of these countries. Nothing is going to change. So whoever is in power in the U.S., unless the United States realizes that the world has changed, that there are other actors in the global order, and that they want their voices to be heard, they want their interests to be considered, nothing's much going to change.
Okay, let me get Scott Faulkner back into this, and on that thought, Mr. Faulkner, are we expecting something different in policy? Because Donald Trump has come out and said that the Ukraine war would never have happened had I been there. There was peace in my time, okay? The world was not in a state of conflict, and I will fix it very, very quickly. We don't know what the plan is, but you really think he can?
I think so, because number one, he's going to ramp up American defense capabilities. Number two, he's going to slap all the sanctions back on Iran. Number three, he's going to, as he says, drill, baby, drill. If you drive down the price of of petroleum in the world, Russia starts to become bankrupt. And that's one of the other reasons that Russia got emboldened, not only because we bungled the disastrous retreat from Afghanistan. I mean, think of it. If all of that equipment in Afghanistan, instead of being handed over to the Taliban, had been shipped to Kiev, there would never have been an invasion. In fact, that the Biden-Harris administration has the weakest, I mean, absolutely the weakest foreign policy and national security team in American history. And the world knows it, which is why they're taking advantage of it.
Okay, forgive me for being cynical, but I'm going to ask the question. Moira Moynihan, many people would think that the United States wanted the Russian invasion. They propped up Kiev and thinking that there will be a NATO entry or a European Union entry, which in the end never happened. And they teased Russia in, and it suits them. Ukrainians are dying and Russians are dying. There's no really cost to America, and it suits the global policy. So it was a smart thing to do to get out of Washington, get out of Afghanistan, where Americans were dying, and shift the focus of a global conflict with Russia into Ukraine.
Well, first of all,
let Maura take that. Maura, go ahead.
No, I agree with Mr. Faulkner that the Biden administration has the weakest and most feckless and ineffective foreign policy team I have ever seen in my lifetime. I'm glad my father's dead and not alive to see this. And it is important to remember, and working class people here in New York State feel this very strongly. Donald Trump is the first president in 8 years not to start a war. He says this frequently on the campaign trail. And my father always said this: the fundamental and first responsibility of government is to control the use of force. Likewise, India has never started any armed conflict. It has been, it's never been the belligerent, but it has been involved in wars that it didn't start. And I just, if I may correct my co-panelist, the lady from Moscow, actually, there is no effort to contain China from the Biden administration. They are so pro-China. It is shocking to me as someone who's very pro-India. They have this strange obsession with Russia. Russia's always the bad guys. When I watched Vladimir Putin, he doesn't get censored in Asia. They censor him here. They censor Russia Today and other news. But he was there on the Thai TV saying he wants peace with the West, peace with America, a new era of cooperation. And bear in mind that Kamala Harris' administration will be all the same people from the Biden administration. 85% of them were from the Obama administration. They're very anti-India. I was in India with the Dalai Lama when Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize, and said the first thing Obama said was he would not meet his fellow Peace Prize laureate, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because the capture of Tibet is so important to communist China. It has tipped the balance of power in Asia. Now India has to spend, 70% of its military budget defending the Tibet border, and China has the high ground of Asia. And believe me, we are also at war with China, because in 2019, China declared a people's war on the United States. I lived through and documented for Radio Free Asia the people's war on the Kingdom of Nepal, a small country, easy work. Communist China won. Well, we're in year 6 of their people's war, and look what's happened to our country.
Okay, but would there, Ms. Moynihan, would a Trump administration be keen on being very vocal about defending a Taiwan, of deploying American troops on the ground? That's also a large leap of imagination.
Well, absolutely. Just listen to Kash Patel, whose parents immigrated from India to New York. He was national security advisor for Trump, and they are very pro-India, pro-Taiwan, pro-Japan, pro-Thailand. Our oldest treaty relationship is with the Kingdom of Siam from the early 1800s, and the Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, was very anti-Thailand. By the way, I've met all these people. I've known Donald Trump for many, many years as a New Yorker. And the other point that Mr. Faulkner was making that I absolutely agree with is the media is 95% not just liberal, left. wing, communist sympathizers. For 4 decades, Donald Trump was a hero in New York. Every magazine had him on the cover. Every red carpet, he was there. Every Democratic politician pleaded and begged for his contributions and his endorsement. And it was only when he beat Hillary, who's a carpetbagger, who came in and took my father's Senate seat in 2000. She never lived in New York. But, you know, my dad was old. He had some health issues. He couldn't fight the DNC, and you couldn't fight her. Mr. Faulkner is quite right about how she was she's very difficult to work with. I've spent a lot of time with her. Not pro-India, pro-China also. And so the way the media has turned on Donald Trump is, I find, absolutely shocking. And the lies they tell about it. And Wikipedia, come on, we all know that Wikipedia was taken over by that woman who now runs National Public Radio. And she had ties to the Chinese Communist Party and changed all the Wikipedia pages. They used to be pretty good about 20 years ago. You know, you could read about the Great Leap Forward. You could read about Communist China. You can't anymore. It's anti-India and it's pro-Communist China and very anti-Russia. And I would like to see peace with Russia. I would like to see unity.
But there is polarization. Scott Faulkner, there is now, as we talk more and we go deeper into what is now the last mile, are we seeing an America closer to consensus or as polarized as ever?
This is the most divisive campaign since 1860, and that led to a civil war. We have absolutely no middle ground left in this country. A lot of it, again, is because the media has demonized one side and sainted the other. But the key is that there's absolutely, I mean, there are people who, I mean, marriages have broken up over this. Families have broken up over this. This is the most divisive election since 1860. And, I mean, there's been huge gaps in the past. I mean, 1972, certainly the 1980, 1984, 1988. I mean, these were major crossroad elections as well, but none of them have the acrimony. None of them have the poison. None of them have the piles of lies that have been put out in this one. There's no middle ground left, no matter who wins tomorrow, and it's probably going to may take a couple days to sort out, especially the House and the Senate, that I just don't know how we're going to come back from the brink on this. America is broken.
Okay, is it? I mean, you say that, but we've seen Gore versus Bush. That didn't go down to the wire. That went into Supreme Court cases and recounting in Florida. You're saying this is worse.
That was legal. But we're not talking. We're talking about people who hate each other, who have demonized each other. I mean, think of any other election where people have been called garbage, where people have been called Nazis and fascists. I mean, this is absolutely off the rails.
Why? What's the symptom? Why has that happened?
Because the left wants power. They sense it. They think if this election happens and they win, it'll be the last free election in American history, because they're going to grab everything. They're going to take the high ground. They're going to take all the ground. They've already got so much in their favor. The media, Hollywood, academia, they now want everything else. They taste total victory forever. And that's what they are desperate for. Just like they went bananas when, for the first time in 80 years, you had a conservative majority working on the Supreme Court. They just can't take having any power shared with anyone else. That's how they're totalitarians. They're communists, totalitarian.
For more such videos, subscribe to the Newsx YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.